Community-led growth is everywhere these days, but what does it mean? How can it transform your work? And what does it take to design a thriving community around your brand and product? Today, we're talking about community design, the new growth engine for companies and a way for your users to connect with one another, to give you product feedback, and to accelerate your brand. If you're a marketer, a community manager, or a leader at your company, you won't want to miss this deep dive into community design by our expert mentor, Bri L, who has been designing and growing communities for years. Yay! I'm the founder of Pocketboard, and today I'm joined with one of our Pocketboard mentors, Bri L, who is an expert in community design. Bri, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, thanks, Erica. So I'm a community designer, builder, grower. I split my time between Portland, Oregon, and Kailua Kona here on the Big Island in Hawaii. You might hear some birds in the background. And I mentor community managers on Pocketboard to help them know how to launch or grow their community. The bigger picture here is that I help brands go from being product-led to community-led and all that that entails.
So Bri is basically a mastermind on building communities. And in particular, she partners with purposeful brands to turn their super fan customers into a community of advocates. She's going to walk you through all of the things she's learned over many years of building some of the best design communities in the world. And if you stick around to the end, she's going to share with you a horror story that basically outlines all of the what not to do's when you're building a community. And while we know that everyone loves a good train wreck story, we also think that it's useful to hear these real world examples of how community design can go wrong so that you know not just what to do, but also what not to do. Bri, I have a stat I want to share with you that, as I was preparing for this conversation with you, I wanted to learn a little bit about your world. And I did a little bit of research because this is fairly new to me. And so many of our listeners will be coming from the same perspective as me, where this may be the first time they've ever heard about community-led growth or community design. And what I found just in a couple of quick internet searches is that community-led growth is apparently taking tech by storm. I was just furiously reading the internet to show up to this conversation with just an inkling of knowledge about all of the expertise you're about to drop on us. And I was astounded by some of the facts and quotes that I read about community-led design. For example, the co-founder of Reddit, Alexis Ohanian, who, by the way, is also married to Serena Williams, said that in 5 years, he expects that more than half of the top 500 publicly traded companies are going to have a chief community officer.
That's super interesting. I did not know that, but I do not find it hard to believe at all. And, it's interesting because when I try to explain to people what I do, what I've found is that a lot of the language around community has been kind of hijacked by social media, but it's actually very distinctly different. And in my opinion, robustly more valuable to activate your customers in a community. So I have no problem believing that, but it's interesting, and I'm hopeful to see the language shift and the awareness around community and the value that it can bring to your company or your brand or your organization to shift as well.
After reading that prediction from someone who has built one of the world's largest, most renowned communities of community, hearing him say that felt really powerful to me. And it really got me excited to talk to you today about community design. It's something that on Pocketboard, we think about as kind of essential to the way that people learn and grow and develop in their careers. Our whole model involves people getting help from other people who are experts, and communities are like that in that community members vary from someone who it's their first day in the community and they're just learning, or lurkers as they're called, I've heard, to people that are really leaders within the community. So I want to just dive into this to your experience. I think a lot of our listeners and people that are watching this video are going to be at kind of all different levels of their exposure to community-led growth and community design. So I want to just dive into your framework and your tips for building communities. And afterward, I do have some questions for you that some of our Pocketboard mentees shared in advance.
Yeah, awesome. Sounds great.
I think it's maybe a good first step to actually just define community because, people can be coming from different walks of life and exposure levels here. So maybe we can just hear from you, a community design expert, how you define what community means in the context of a business or a brand.
Yeah. So, and it's especially important because I think it's such a buzzword and it can be such a fluffy term. It's not in its essence, but it really can be interpreted that way. So some people think that someone commenting on your Instagram post is community, and I would argue that it's not. Some people think that throwing a bunch of people together in a Slack channel and hoping that they'll chit chat is community, and I don't think that's community either. I define community quite simply as a diverse group of people with common values, interests, or ambitions who are gathering for a shared purpose. And that shared purpose is really key when you look at the design and the mechanisms behind the community that you're crafting. That shared purpose eventually turns into people turning towards each other as well.
Many people who are listening or watching this are probably members of a community themselves, and they may want to improve that community, or maybe they're brands or companies or community managers who want to then to build that thriving community around their product or service. So let's just start at step one. Before we commit to building a community, how does a business or a brand know if community-led growth is a good fit for them?
This is an important step to start with. So I like to present a framework to understand where a community-led brand comes in. So there's lots of different ways that you can lead your brand. There's marketing-led. This is when you're relying really heavily on brand and paid ad strategy. Primarily, you're generating awareness when you're marketing-led. Sales-led, you're relying on your sales funnel. Founder-led, usually there's like a charismatic personality that's at the center. There are plenty of horror stories about founder-led brands we won't go into. Product-led is when the product itself leads your strategy. So your product is best in class. It's why people come to you. And then we have community-led, and this is a little bit newer. So this is where you rely on a community of customers to drive your strategy, your product roadmap, and even your marketing and your sales. In order to be community-led, you actually need to have a seriously good product. So how I frame what I do is help brands go from being product-led to community-led. So the first question you need to ask is, where are you today? Which category do you fit into? And the second question is, where do you want to be in the future? So I look for the brands who are strongly product-led, but desire to be community-led.
I see. So a brand or a company needs to start with some intention about how they really want to spread their product. Either that's via sales, the excellence of the product itself, or by this like kind of viral community behavior loop that not only gives you feedback on the product, but also kind of creates this, super fan club. When I listen to your options that you just went through, it feels to me like community-led is the obvious choice. Can all companies or should all companies use this growth tactic?
It's a great question, Erica. Ultimately, the framework and the mechanisms that we use to create community can be applied to all different industries. At the end of the day, for myself and the work that I do, I like to partner with brands that are doing something good in the world. So what I've found is if you don't have some sort of strong mission, purpose, strong values that are attracting customers to your brand, it's going to be really difficult to convince them to dedicate time, attention, and even other resources to joining what you're doing in a community. Sometimes if you don't have a strong purpose or values or mission attached to what you're doing, if your product is just like above and beyond, clearly hands down the best thing on the market, it might still be possible. But if you don't have a robust vision and values that are bringing those people together around your product, I don't know that community is going to be a great fit for you.
One question that just jumps straight out at me as I hear this, because I think about, my brand, our company at Pocketboard, we're really trying to help people catapult their careers, land their dream jobs, and, experience personal and professional growth that's unprecedented. And That's obviously a mission that people can get really excited about. But naturally, my question is like, how large does your company need to be? How large does your user base need to be for someone to start building a community like this?
I always encourage people to begin thinking about community from day one, but crafting a robust and strategic full-on community build, like something that I offer to my clients, I usually wait for something like that until they have 5,000 customers or members or users so that they can see a profound lift from the program. And 5,000 might feel kind of random, but I really operate off of the Pareto principle, which is, or the 80-20 rule, you might recognize it as. So the Pareto principle is that 80% of the effects are coming from 20% of the causes. So generally, if you look at, and it's amazing phenomenon that happens everywhere from agriculture to sales to like anywhere that you have cause and effect, essentially. So if you take the top 20% of your customers, likely they are generating 80% of your revenue. So once you have 5,000 customers, that means that you have about 1,000 in that top 20% category. And there's a really natural lip at 1,000. You can call them super fans. Once you have 1,000 of them, that's where there's like a natural lift within your organization.
So it sounds like company has to have a mission, something that people can get excited about. You can start building a community at any point, but really like where you start to get the like a large enough number of super fans is kind of at that 5,000 user line. Maybe you can kind of give us some examples of who you found that community-led growth and community design has been transformational for. Maybe some of the companies you've worked with who've adopted this, growth strategy and how it's worked out for them.
It's pretty awesome. I love that in my work, I get to work with such a diverse group of different companies. I've worked with everything from sustainable apparel company to social emotional learning kids book publishing company, to media brands, to a physical game product, to SaaS products. So the key to success for a client who sees the community as part of their overall business strategy, not just a segment of their marketing strategy. So when a company approaches me from a community-led posture, they are going to get 10 times out of the community that we build, more than a client who just wants to see this as sort of a side program to be able to say that they have a community, or maybe they just want to attain some vanity metrics around their customers. And so that's really what I look for, and who I have seen benefit the most from leveraging the community.
Okay, so you've completely sold me on this concept of community-led growth. And let's say that we've decided together that Pocketboard is a great brand for community-led growth, and that we have this posture. What comes next?
So usually we start with an exercise that I've adapted from Donald Miller's Building a Story brand to help onboard me to the customer's journey and learn how to speak to them on that journey. Clients love this exercise. Usually there's like two really profound aha moments when we work through it. And the first is that they realize that the customer is the hero of this narrative that they are telling, and the brand is really the guide. So a lot of times companies will spend a lot of time trying to convince you that they're the hero of the story that they're telling. But when we reframe it to put the customer at the center of that, it's a really profound moment for the brand. And the second is that then they realize that what we're doing by creating community is we're actually creating a way for the hero of this story to become the guide for the next hero, and we're connecting them to each other. So it helps me onboard to their customers' experience and everything that the journey that they're on, but it also helps the exercise itself helps reframe what we're doing in a way that invites narrative and storytelling and is easier for us all to digest. And the second thing that we do is we determine our first iteration of the framework for the community, which is based on what we hope the community will be doing. And oftentimes this is like wildly different than what we actually end up building because there's so many different levers and variables that you can essentially use them like ingredients when you're putting together a recipe for a successful community. So for example, there are events or challenges, learning components, rewards, and a lot of other variables. So we customize the program with a combination of these ingredients or variables. for example, to get a little bit more tactical, event activation. So we start making assumptions about, okay, what types of events do we think the community will benefit from? How are they going to engage with us? And how will we get them to attend? With rewards, we work through is your customer going to be more motivated by personal accumulation and using a framework like tokens or points? Or are they going to be more motivated by recognition and using a system that's more like badges and status? So we eventually test all of those assumptions that we make in the first iteration in a focus group, and that's really where everything falls apart in the best way. It like breaks open because that's where we're actually able to like test and iterate and see what's resonating, what's not. And so in order to do that focus group at the same time that we're crafting all of those assumptions, we're identifying who is in that top 20% of the customers, and we get to start testing those assumptions within the focus group.
Okay, so we're hitting that 20% number again, which is, it seems like you're, following your Pareto principle. The top 20% of people engaged in your community are going to be, the ones that are going to really need to be part of kind of guiding you, the heroes of designing your community. And I love the fact that you kind of talk about this as as more of a scientific process, where it's like, it's an experiment. You don't always get the result that you want, but you have these hypotheses, these assumptions that you're making, and then you test them. And some of them aren't going to work. And I love that, I'm a scientist and engineer myself. And so like, that's been kind of the nature of all the things I've ever done in my career. Maybe one question I have related to that is community managers. We may have quite a few people who are listening and watching us right now who are actually community managers. If you had to like go back to early career Bri and give her advice on how to be the best community manager, what would that advice be?
It's a great question. It kind of relates to what you were just saying. I think early on, there was a lot of pressure. I felt a lot of pressure to be a fortune teller. And when you're dealing with something as nuanced as other humans, it's impossible to just say like, it's not as linear as A plus B equals C. And so to put on that posture of discovery and that posture of curiosity, I felt a lot of pressure in the very beginning to be like, well, either this will work or it won't work. And I kind of had to have this breakthrough moment where I was like, it's going to work regardless, but we have to treat ourselves like discoverers. We have to treat ourselves like scientists. We have to treat ourselves like the curious humans that we are. And we have to be more committed to what do we need to change and enhance and improve, rather than kind of like putting yourself on the hook constantly for like, will this work or will this not work? Because it will work. It's just sometimes you don't have the right design and you don't have the right framework in place to get the outcomes that you want.
Yeah, I absolutely love that. I love this idea of kind of reframing yourself as an explorer, discoverer. And I know that, just doing some of this research, the community managers often tend to be like one person in a company is the kind of community manager. And so I'm sure that probably feels like an immense pressure to deliver, and delivery and exploration are fundamentally kind of different things. And so I love that the way that you're framing this for folks is you have to think about this as a series of experiments where you will iterate your way to the right community design, but you have to treat it like experimentation and discovery, because you will have to explore before you can kind of exploit the perfect framework that works for your community. And I'm sure that many community managers who are listening and watching are thinking to themselves, oh man, I wish that I had someone to advocate for me and like tell that to my boss. Tell that to my stakeholders who want this like perfect community design just right overnight and have it work. And so I want to just acknowledge that, because I think that that's, the whole spirit of why we do mentoring, is to help people who are earlier on in their journeys navigate through that, all of the factors that influence, your feeling of success and your ability to have the outcomes that you want. And some of that is just having compassion from someone who's further along, who can kind of give you those hidden secrets and help you get there. So I want to get us back on track, but I just want to thank you for sharing that, Bri, because obviously, I think a lot of people want to believe that they kind of come in with the right answers, that they're just, it's going to be like just hard work and it'll work out. But I think taking that curiosity and acknowledging that, people are less predictable than one would think. and being willing to kind of
Powerful.
experiment. Yeah, it's really powerful. I think it's really powerful what you just said.
Yeah, no, and humans in general, less predictable, more powerful, which is why it's so, I think community
Yeah.
is a difficult thing to wrap your hands around because it's not as linear, but it is exponentially more powerful. But it takes patience and it takes iteration for sure, like you're saying.
It's worth it, is what you're saying. You're saying that the power, like, even though the experimentation can be challenging and your hunches, your assumptions, your hypotheses may all keep getting disproven, but eventually, like, you will find a way to harness the power of people. And when you harness that power the right way, you're going to get 10x.
Yeah. Yep. Exactly.
Okay, so obviously I'm very excited about this. You're really inspiring me, and we're kind of at the place now where we've done a few exercises, we've designed our framework, we've identified our 20% top customers, super fans. We've held that focus group with them, and we've tested the design of the community framework. At this point, we're thinking we've got a good framework. We're ready to launch it to the rest of the community. Talk me through what that community launch entails.
Yeah, so we work through things like what is the onboarding process for community members, what's their journey through the community. We've set up automations and workflows, so to make that as automated as possible. And one of my favorite things is setting up the rhythms for community activity.
Well, that sounds super interesting. What is a rhythm? What's an example?
You'll find rhythms and rituals in any community that you participate in. So rhythms are really just a habit forming mechanism. They are the prompt that creates the starting point for action. So an example that you can think that anyone can relate to, if you have ever participated in Throwback Thursday on Instagram, right? It's a rhythm, it's a prompt, or even an excuse in some cases for you to share a younger, potentially adorable or sexier picture of yourself. Another like really simple rhythm that is in the community context would be a post that you make in your community every Friday that prompts members to post their wins from the week in the comments, just like a celebratory rhythm. Another example, if you're familiar with Lululemon, they get feedback. They leverage their crowd of ambassadors to get feedback. And so when a new season launches or is getting ready to launch, they'll send out product to test out, and their ambassadors provide feedback and also share it with their friends. So you might not think of that as a rhythm, but slowly over time, it sort of builds this this mythic energy around it, right? Of like, ooh, like a new launch is coming. Like that means that we're going to get product. It means we're going to be able to test it out. Like they start to rely on these rhythms, and they operate as the prompt for the action that the brand wants to see.
So I think you just blew my mind. I didn't ever consider that the Throwback Thursday hashtag was designed by a community manager. Like I'm kind of astounded right now, realizing that all of these rituals that are part of my everyday experience as part of the communities that I participate in were probably designed in. They weren't just happenstance. Is that correct?
There's very thoughtful and intentional design behind those rhythms. And one of the problems that I encounter in my work is that people really, they see the viral behavior of community and they think it just happened organically. And it may be like very, 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 very rarely do you get viral activity without a very intentional design mechanism behind it. You're putting a very strategic prompt or rhythm in front of people that they latch onto, and that also perpetuates itself. The most powerful rhythms are ones that actually beget more activity by the nature of the prompt.
Yeah, to me, it sounds like, with the way we just talked about designing this community, right? You're taking the 20% of most engaged users and you're like building this community around what works for them. And in many ways, you're kind of like, they're so excited about your brand. And so these rituals feel like almost permission. You're giving them permission to express that excitement.
Yep. 100%. And that's the intentionality behind it. That's where like there is actually a lot of organic excitement and energy around what you're doing, but it might not just be prompted in the right way yet. And that's where your community manager comes in. That's where the strategy comes in.
Okay, great. So we've got our community design. We've set up some, engagement. We've set up some rituals to really engage people. We've launched. Now what happens?
Even though I use the word launch, like eventually, you need a launch date, you launch the community, but I really like to think about it. Communities aren't launched, they are grown. And so it is helpful. I just want to be a little cautious with the word launch, even though it is the most appropriate thing for when you like do just press go and everything opens up. So I like to launch the community with a live event, especially if your community is exclusively online. This can avoid your community launch just feeling kind of like an awkward waiting room. When you have an event that kicks things off, you're able to warmly welcome everyone. And if you think about your community as like a house or a space, as soon as someone comes into your home, you take off their coat, you welcome them in. In Hawaii, you take off your shoes and you maybe get them a drink. So having an event to kick things off can help with the energy that you're going for with a kickoff. And then after that, I really like it's really critical that you get people engaged within their first 30 days. So the data shows that like when people get engaged within their first 30 to 60 days, they're so much more likely to stick around long-term than somebody who doesn't. So oftentimes I'll set up either a specific space for people who have just joined, and maybe they're in that space just for their first 30 days. Or you can create a challenge for everyone who joins, this week to be completed in their first month. It could be as simple that challenge could be as simple as prompting them to join their first event within the first month. Or it could be post, your intention for what you want to get out of this community or what you want to give to this community in this beginner space. It could be as intensive as like make your way through this series of trainings or prompts or exercises. But I do like to create a dedicated space in the community where those new people are added so that we can speak directly to them and they can also get connected to other people in a similar space to them.
So I'm an engineer. So like, I think of everything as a launch. I love this idea of like taking a step back and saying, yes, there's going to be like an initiating event that your early users can be part of. But the reality of communities is that they're grown, they're evolving, they're their own kind of entity. But what you just described feels like a lot. So I'm kind of curious, are you generally doing this all yourself? How involved is the brand or company in this kind of like crafting and execution of this community?
In many companies, I will work alongside of a community manager. That's sort of the ideal situation. Some companies already have someone in that role full-time or part-time. And if it's a really early stage company, this might be a person who's wearing a lot of hats, or the founder or co-founder might be wearing a lot of those hats. But many companies also hire early career community managers, and it's a profession that's growing and evolving very quickly. So usually it's helpful for that community manager to be in place, but then to have some sort of mentor or expert like myself who's available to inform some of the strategy and also overcome the obstacles that pop up. So this is where a mentor like me can do monthly training to grow their skills as a community manager and do monthly one-on-ones for troubleshooting those specific issues, especially after that build has been released. So once the build is out in the world and living and breathing and robust and has some like legs to walk on, that's usually how we transition. Is I continue to work with the community manager to mentor them and make sure that they're able to overcome any obstacles that pop up even after the community is up and running.
Maybe you can explain why you wanted to become a mentor on Pocket Board.
I was fresh out of college when I was hired to build my first community for a social enterprise in Portland, Oregon. So for 7 years, I grew the community, developed leaders. And by the time I left, that community was generating 90% of the company's revenue. So for like the first 3 to 4 years, I literally didn't know anyone else who was doing the thing that I was doing. And I was flying really blind, making a lot of mistakes, but I learned a ton of really valuable lessons. So eventually I got connected to a couple of mentors, but the process and the community that we built could have really been expedited if I had had more of that support in those tools. So when I left that role and I started Ember, my business now, to build communities for all different sorts of brands, I found that I naturally end up mentoring community managers. It's something that I wish I had 9 years ago. So it makes me really happy to be able to share the knowledge now.
And I think what's so cool about the way, like the expertise that you have and the number of different communities you've worked with through your practice is that you can kind of jump in with anyone, right? Like if if I didn't work with you to build out the community, if I'm not the, first hire community manager on a community that you design, just hearing from mentees that have worked with you on Pocketboard, what we hear is like, oh no, like you can just dive right in because there's certain patterns, even though there's a lot of levers that you can pull in the design and kind of iteration of a community. It seems like there's some pretty common ways that communities can fail to thrive, or where they're like taking off so fast that you're like trying to keep up with the community. And so I just wanted to acknowledge that and also state that one of the things that I think is really powerful about your experience is that you're able to just dive right in a one-on-one with someone you've never met, a community that you've never engaged with, and help them kind of diagnose and troubleshoot what they can do to make their community more thriving and have it grow in a more designed and intentional direction in the way that they want it.
Isn't it like one of the most refreshing things when you meet someone who you're like, I can explain to you in one sentence what it would take like probably an hour to describe to someone else.
or 10 hours of searching on the internet. I think that's one thing that's challenging about this field. From my hours of searching and trying to just read up on this, I started to realize there's a lot of content out there about community design and very little about community-led growth. So I'm excited that we get to launch this into YouTube and the world can learn from you. But I learned that there was a lot about community management and like some of it didn't seem like the best advice. So especially not now that I've heard all of this from you. And so I'm realizing that there may be a lot of people out there that are like digging through a lot of internet junk, if you will, and trying to like figure out what to do for their community. And I just think it's really powerful that we've had many people get on the phone with you and like in 10 minutes, they're like, this would have taken me 3 weeks to figure out. So I think that's really powerful. And it's a powerful element of kind of specializing in any given field. Okay. So I want to move on because now we've got our community. We've got our 20% most engaged customers. They're launched in. They have been activated with the rest of the community through our launch event. And now I'm the community manager and I'm meeting with you monthly. And we're meeting monthly to continue to fan the flames and grow my thriving community. What does my work look like from here on out? What is the daily work of a community manager in a well-designed community?
It's worth mentioning that a community is not just a set it and forget it situation. So they're living and they're evolving. Communities are not stagnant. I like to say that your program is perfectly designed to get you the outcome that you are getting. So if you don't like the outcome, and it's very, very rare that when you like launch something that it's going to like hit the mark the very first time, right? Anyone who's ever done anything brave in the world knows this. But if you don't like the outcomes that you're getting, then we really need to put on that posture of discovery that we talked about to understand what tweaks need to be made in order to get that different outcome. So communities are designed, and it's our job to be the scientists in the community to run those experiments, measure the success, and discover how the community is evolving. Once you're in that mindset of experimentation, it's a delicate balance between being flexible and agile enough without giving your community whiplash. So this is why I like to have some really fundamental rhythms that the community can always count on. So the community manager is executing those, whether that's maybe it's like a monthly call where people are gathering together around a specific purpose or aim or vision or exercise. But then I really love to sprinkle in different challenges or events to keep things fresh and provide a little bit of a playground for experimentation. So the community can start to know like, okay, these things I can sort of count on, and maybe they'll make tweaks and changes, but I can kind of like feel secure that these things will stick around. But then there's like a different category of posts or content or events that that is always going to be changing and evolving. And that's where a lot of the fresh, fun energy comes from. So every event should be about fostering engagement, the outcomes that your community is looking to drive. But you're also listening and learning from your members and learning how to unleash that collective power to drive growth. So that's an ever evolving process as a community manager.
what are some specific activities that the community manager will be doing during that community fostering time? And then how do they measure to see if the things that they're experimenting with are working?
Ooh, yes. So this is really where it gets really fun. So we talked about the 80/20, and you're looking for that top 20%. Once you have the community with at a certain level, like there's a certain level of stability and engagement that's happening. The next step is that you're looking for not just the 20% of your customers who you're turning into your community. You're looking for within your community who is the top 20% that is the most engaged, the most active by whatever metrics and outcomes you're assessing your community. And how do we create contributors or even leaders out of that cohort? So they could already be partnering with you. They're showing a lot of enthusiasm and activity within the community. And the next best question, and how this connects to your question, Erica, is, you asked, how do we measure these things? And one of the things I always add as a measurement for community is who are the leaders and who are the rising leaders in the community, and how can we woo them closer into leadership within the community. So I call this the woo funnel. There's like a whole framework for it where we identify like what are the different levels of engagement that a community member can be at, and then what are the mechanisms for each member at each level. How do we like woo them one level closer in to the heart of this community? One huge mistake that I made really early on in my career was in assessing those levels of leadership. I created really soft and subjective criteria for the leaders in the first community that I managed. So the standards to be like considered a leader were not based in outcomes or actions, but they were actually an application process, which really just bred resentment and entitlement and like favoritism in the community. And it was like a really rough adjustment, but there is a really simple way to manage this. And all that is to define what it means to be a leader in the community. Make it transparent, make it outcomes based, and show the steps that anyone could take to attain that recognition as a leader.
One thing we haven't actually talked about is this concept of leaders in the community. Why is it important to identify and to kind of promote leadership within the community?
That's like the secret sauce of a community, right? Where you're scaling your efforts. So you might be one community manager, Erica, and like you're doing all of this work and you're getting like let's say you put in 1 calorie of work and you're getting like 10 back because it's community and that's like the nature of how it works. But if you can put in 1 calorie into someone else who puts in 1 calorie that gets you 100 back, like that's where the scale really takes off. And that's where the community becomes not just a linear relationship between each member and the brand itself, but those members are connected to each other. Those members are creating value for the community with very little effort on the part of the community manager. So from a scale perspective, but also this is where you're transitioning your community from I'm trying to come up with a better term for this, but right now I'm limited. I'm calling it the transition from cult to network. So when you launch your community, anybody who is in your community, the reason that they're coming is because they're connected to you, the brand. So it's like a very linear relationship, right? It's just like that one-to-one connection. But for your community to really transition and become stronger, you need to find a way to pivot those relationships from just being directly to the brand and creating strengthened relationships between members. That's when you go from it being just a cult, like just the brand at the center, to a network where the value of your community comes from the connections that members have with each other. And leadership makes that not just possible, but scalable.
This has been like an incredible crash course on community design and community-led growth. But what I love about what you've described is that this is such a win-win-win. I mean, it's a win for your brand. It's a win for your users. They get to connect with other users. They get to connect with the brand. They feel like they have a voice in the product that's getting built for them. And then it's a huge win for the company as well. Like whatever company is building this product or this brand. So Wow, Bri, I feel blown away. And I know I will express for myself gratitude on behalf of myself, but also all of the Pocketboard users that you have taken this time to share your knowledge and expertise. The YouTube community who may have never heard of Pocketboard before, who are stumbling into this video. And we do actually, the Pocketboard mentee community has a few questions for you if you have a few more minutes to walk through them.
Yeah, definitely. I love it. Go for it.
Okay, so first question is, what are some brands I might know who use community-led growth to build huge businesses?
Lululemon is a big one that comes to mind that I mentioned earlier. It was how they actually initially exploded. They would target one city, they would find ambassadors, they would invest in them, build them up, equip them with lots of product, and they would really saturate the market of each city before they would move to another one and expand to another one, and so on and so forth. That was a very like on the ground, hands-on experience, but it really got them to where they are today. Duolingo is another fascinating one. There's a really phenomenal TED talk by, it's like head of community, or I can't remember what her role was, but I didn't know that Duolingo essentially leveraged these local meetups to scale their growth. And that was one of the main ways that they expanded to being, what are they, the top language learning app right now in the world. So yeah, those are two that come to mind. There's so many more, and I could go on, but those two stand out to me.
I love this next question. Bri, what are some of your favorite communities that you are a part of?
Right now I'm in a community of community builders. And it's personally my favorite because we just speak the same language. And I think there's this feeling when you've like arrived at a good community, and it's a good community because when you arrive, you're like, oh, I found my people. Like, we speak the same language. Oh my gosh, you struggle with that? I struggle with that. Like, we're asking the same questions. We're grappling with the same obstacles. And so I really love, there's a lot of activity. There's like two platforms that I work with specifically, Circle and Heartbeat, and they both have communities. And so I always love being a part of those spaces to just learn from other people. And it's exactly the target market. I'm like their target customer. So I love those communities. I've really benefited from the Akimbo community. So this is like, if you're familiar with Seth Godin, there's like a series of cohort-based workshops, and there's communities attached to each of those workshops. And so I really love, they have a very thoughtful framework and culture for their content and how you engage at those workshops that I think is like very masterfully done.
Our next question, I feel like I might have secretly written this one. So you said that really ideally you're going to start your community design and you're kind of moving towards a major launch once you have about 5,000 users. So this question is from someone who maybe has a smaller set of users, and they say, hey, what do we do if we are not really at that 5,000 user mark, but we want to start sowing the seed so that when we do have the right number of users, that we're not spending, 3 to 6 months designing the community when we have the people? How do we kind of like load the gun for ourselves so that as soon as we're at the right size, where we have the right kind of carrying capacity, we can have an incredible community?
Yeah, it's a really great question. It's a very common question. If you're not ready for a full-on community build, start by fostering that relationship with your customer. So you can do that on social media. You can do that through email marketing and content. One of my favorite ways to start doing this is by inviting your customers to be a bigger part of your product decisions where it's appropriate. So hosting product-led focus groups with your customers to get their feedback. There are tons of different tools for loyalty programs or referral programs to begin activating your customers and experimenting with making them more involved in the process, even if you're not quite ready for a full-on community yet.
The next question is from a community manager. I'm a community manager and I'm struggling to get the leadership team at my company on board with what we're doing on the community side. Any advice?
Oof, I know how that feels. This can be a really long journey, right? To get internal stakeholders on board. And my encouragement to this person would be to know that while it is your role to represent the community to your corporate office and to show the value, there's limits to what you can do. So when I was in this position and when I find myself in this position, I like to focus on what I can control. So I focus on making the community the absolute best it can be. In my experience, if you can connect the product team and show them how, or really any team in your company, that you can show them how the community can support and inform their work, you'll be able to show a ton of value. So when I, work with a team internally, I'm always trying to connect with unexpected players to see like, how can this community support what you're doing and make your job more effective ultimately.
I think this is maybe our last question, and I'm asking for a friend. The question is, I'm a founder who would love to have a community that could support our product and support each other, but our company is small and we have a small number of people on the team. What roles would need to be in place to start working on community-led growth and to build design a community?
Yeah. So when I came on as a community manager with the startup that I worked at for 7 years, there were only like 7 people at the company. So I know what it feels like to be strapped for resources. If you can hire for a community manager role, that is where I would start. If not, maybe you have a customer support person who you trust. I would see if they would partner with you to start exploring some options around community initiatives. That's actually how I started. I was working in customer service, and after dealing with everyone's problems all day long, I was so excited to get to work with the top cohort of customers who wanted to be more involved with the brand. So for me, that's how it progressed. If you're strapped for resources, that might be a good place to start.
Awesome. Wow. Bri, once again, this has been such an enlightening conversation. I think it would be great if we could do a quick recap. There's been a lot of knowledge you've dropped. So we can just recap the framework and what you've learned building communities over many years. And then we will, as promised, share your community building horror story with the team.
Yeah, it's like, how people are always like, man, when you ask for like their embarrassing story, they're like, I don't really like remember it. That like never happens to me. I'm like, oh, I remember it. I remember every detail. Yeah, no, let's recap. So 3 main things. Communities are grown, they're not launched. Community is the long game. And the reason that I chose the name Ember for what I do is because I liken building a community to building a fire. And if you've ever built a fire or watched Survivor, you know that there are no shortcuts. But when you foster it and when you tend to it, eventually what happens is you have these bright, hot embers in place that ultimately ignite everything around them. The second thing is, if you're getting ready to build a community, get on the phone with your customers. This is like absolutely critical for starting to form those relationships. And when your community begins, when it launches, your members they're joining you for that affinity for the brand. So like we talked about with the cult versus the network, in order for the community to become strong and thrive, that affinity for the brand, it has to transition from the brand to other members of the community. So that's when you'll go from your community just being a cult to being a network. And cults do eventually crumble, but networks become empires. So that's a good place to start.
I think everyone's excited about hearing your horror story. So we'll just cue a little drum roll here. All right, Bri, tell us your community building horror story.
Yeah, so something that you have to be really mindful about is not training your community to be entitled. And the biggest mistake that I've made, I would say, is when I partner with a brand not having a thorough enough understanding about how they had trained their community prior to working with me. It's actually super simple to avoid, but there's a surprising amount of brands that really wreck their chances of building a healthy community when they take their top customers and they spoil them with over promises that are not sustainable. So you can avoid this really easily when you just match every reward or incentive very directly to an action or an outcome. And this is where we kind of get a blurry line between community members and influencers, because we've been trained to think about influencers as like you just kind of throw rewards at them and like hope that they post about you. But community is actually like the exact opposite design. You want to say, hey, when you take this action, this is the reward that you will get. So a classic example from of the horror story from the direct sales world that I came from was a brand called Chloe and Isabel, and they eventually went bankrupt because their business model was rewarding their consultants without actually requiring them to do the work that would be required for them to sustain that level of rewards. So we, in the very early years, I was watching that brand, and they had not gone under yet, but I was like, again, just trying to figure out what to do. And I modeled one of our really significant recruiting mechanisms off of their model. And thank goodness we only kept it around for a couple months, because eventually they went under. We were like, quick, like, do not replicate what they're doing. But it's the kind of heart of it is when your community becomes trained to be resistant to change and also expectant of certain rewards, it's super tough to course correct. So don't just throw a ton of rewards or free product right out the gate. Because you think it's going to win you a community. It's not. It's winning you a small army of moochers or lurkers who will eventually turn on you when you stop feeding them, to put it very bluntly.
That is a horror story. I mean, what you're basically describing is the creation of Jurassic Park. And I don't think anyone who would ever want to be part of a community that had that kind of energy, because it isn't a community, right? It's a bunch of people lining up with their hands out. And it sounds to me, Bri, like this was obviously a very huge learning moment for you. And so it kind of harkens back to what you said earlier, right? The community is doing exactly what you designed it to do. One of the things that I got from this story is that you really have to be intentional about the initial design and the changes you're making to your community, because if you start off on the wrong foot, it sounds like it's pretty hard to recover.
Yeah, it can be. And you can course correct, but usually it's a very painful and long process to create a new culture and values around your community.
Wow. Well, it's always hard to hear the worst case scenario, but I know that I personally feel inclined to just shower our community with freebies and just thank them for engaging with us. And I can see how many brands would make the same mistake. So I learned today that building a community is really all about good design, iteration and evolution, experimentation, curiosity, listening to the community. And ultimately, the goal is to make it turn from a cult to a network where the affiliation that they have is no longer with the brand, but it's with one another. So I just want to thank you, Bri, again, for joining us today. And if you're watching this or listening and you're building a community for your brand or business and you want to get advice or coaching from Bri, you can find her on Pocketboard in the link that's in the description. In addition to community design and community-led growth, Bri also advises and mentors on other topics, including affiliate program design, brand ambassador programs, customer journey mapping, community design, of course, and design strategy as a whole. If you'd like to hear more from Bri or any of our other expert mentors on Pocketboard, please subscribe to us to let us know that you want to see more content, and ring the bell to get notified every time we publish a new video on the Pocketboard channel.